It is my pleasure to welcome you to our session today, which is Let's Talk About Creating a Legacy. Today I have a very distinguished guest, David Werdiger, and he is an expert on family succession, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a moment. But before we do, let's have a quick look at the agenda. This is the agenda for today. And what we're going to cover today is how succession relates to family businesses and how it relates to preserving and enhancing your legacy. The first step we're going to do today is explore what is a legacy and why it is important. The second step is to have a look at the identity in family businesses. Are they the same? Are they separate? What does it mean to you? The third thing is, how does doing succession successfully and preserving and enhancing legacy works in the real world? The fourth thing we'll touch today is the importance of awareness. What does it mean to you as a family business owner to be aware of succession? The fifth thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is also to identify what are the challenges you may face when you are trying to successfully implement a succession, both in terms of your family, your business, and your legacy. And then we'll summarize it with a few key takeaways. And that leads me to introducing you, my next guest. How are you, David, today?
Nitay-Yair, I am very well, thank you. I'm surviving through COVID and actually just spending a bit of time away from the office, sometimes in the office, sometimes away from the office, but getting used to this new normal, a new way of doing things.
I think COVID-19 have impacted us all, and particularly a lot of medium-sized businesses across Australia. And I hope to whoever is watching and to you as well, that both you and your family are safe throughout this period.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely impacted. It's impacted everybody in different ways, and certainly business owners have felt it. And also it's something that has put additional stresses on families, not being able to travel, being locked down, and the flow-on effects of any financial stress caused by the pandemic.
That's right. David, for the benefit of those who don't know you, and most of them should know you, let me tell them a little bit about yourself. And if I miss anything, please jump in, and I'm sure I will, because your career has been quite distinguished. To those of you who don't know him, David is a distinguished expert on family succession, family legacy, family businesses, and advised many families in the past. He's also a second generation and a technology entrepreneur. Before I give to David to tell us a little bit more about himself, if you haven't read his book, I highly recommend it. It's called Transition. It's an international bestseller. Please feel free to reach out. If you need the full details, I'm happy to give it to you. David, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Nitay. So a bit about my background. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I'm a second generation family member. My late father was very successful in textile manufacturing and commercial property. And I, being the youngest in the family, saw what was going on and decided I didn't want to join the family business. And instead, I forged a path for myself as a technology entrepreneur. So I started as a software geek, then started my own business, ended up starting 3 businesses and partnering in 2 others, all in the technology and telecommunications space. And then I started thinking about my future, and having developed an understanding of what it's like to be a business owner, I formed the view that I did not want that business to be a lodestone around my neck. I believe very strongly that a business should be an asset for a family, and it should be there to serve the owners, not the other way around. And I've seen so many families who have fantastic businesses, but they are a slave to the business rather than the other way around. So this got me thinking about what I wanted to do in my future. And I ended up taking a bit of a pivot, spending some time on some boards, on nonprofits, understanding governance, understanding family better, did a master's, and then I ended up speaking about family business, family legacy, wealth transition. I wrote a book, as Nitay-Yair has told you, and have become a family advisor. I've set up my own family office. I've sold out of most of my own businesses, and I'm in the process of setting up the the first one, which is the one I still own, towards an exit. And I'm really passionate about helping families go through the journey of wealth transition and business transition. And that means succession for some, it might mean exit for some, as we'll discuss. But really what it's about is that core topic of creating a legacy. And that's what we're here to discuss. Nitay-Yair.
So David, with your permission, I might ask you a personal question here, because the journey you have taken is quite remarkable. As a second generation, it's almost very easy to just go back to the family core business and stay there. What made you do the shift in terms of deciding I'm going to go into this different path slightly and explore succession, or even being aware of succession as a second generation? What got you interested in that path, as opposed to just what most people do, just go through the typical path of a second generation?
So it actually took me probably 25 years to realize why I chose the path that I did, which is interesting. Having grown up around a family business, I was never comfortable as an employee. I always wanted to be a business owner, an entrepreneur, like my father. But I realized only many years later that what I wanted was to be myself, to be my own entrepreneur, rather than to hitch a ride on somebody else's. We're going to talk a little bit about identity, and being the child of a very successful entrepreneur is in itself a challenge, because everybody needs to individuate, to become their own person, rather than live in the shadow of somebody else. And the path I took, which I realized many years later, was exactly that path, to develop my own identity. And having done that, I reflected, and really, doing a master's when I was around 40 was a pivotal moment, because that really got me thinking and writing and thinking more broadly about issues, reflecting on my own journey in the past, reflecting on my family, and reflecting on the future that I wanted to create for myself. And I developed a real passion for learning and for teaching. I've always been somebody who loves helping other people, and that was embodied in the businesses that I created. And it seemed a natural extension to sort of broaden my knowledge about families and how they work, and how succession works, and how wealth transition works. And then take that and say, well, hang on, because I've got such a diverse background, I understand families inside and outside, I understand entrepreneurship, I understand technology, I can put all of that together and be very effective in helping families go through the journey that I've gone through with my family.
And I think it's very interesting, David, and we'll touch on it later on, because I think you mentioned a word which is absolutely critical for the topic of succession, and that's awareness. And we'll touch on it in more details later on. But from what I'm hearing correct, at around the age of 40, that's always the pivot point in terms of awareness of transition, succession, and what the next steps that needs to take. And that's how you started to explore it. Am I understanding it right?
Yeah, that was a pivotal point for me, and there was another factor in there, and that was a bit of a health issue, and that's the sort of thing that happens in your life and gives you an appropriate time to reflect on what might be, what might not be, and take stock and say, well, this is what I want to do with my life, and it was also an important factor in my decision to pivot in the direction I did, away from being closely involved in operating businesses.
It's very interesting, because usually at that age, so my experience, I obviously come from it as an external to a family business. I am, most of you already know, we buy family businesses, and we feel we have a duty to preserve the legacy. So I come from an external point of view. But what we're describing about the healthcare is something that I see more often than not in a later age founders of businesses at around the age of 70, 65 or so. They never think about retirement, and then they get the healthcare, and we'll touch on it later on. They get the healthcare, or some trauma happens in the family, and only then they think about, they become aware of the need to succeed or to retire, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's perhaps a blessing in disguise that happened early on, rather than at the age of 70. And we'll touch later on the issues that comes when you're aware of it late in life as opposed to early.
Yes.
Yeah. So my experience with it, just to those who watch and do not know me, most of you should know already. I come to this environment from a bit of a different perspective. As someone who buy businesses, and I'm very honest here, in my early days, I have completely neglected and misunderstood the concept of succession and legacy and what it means to family businesses. And most of the businesses, obviously, in the range that we buy here in Australia, are family-owned businesses. But what no one tells you is that the family part in family businesses is more important than the word business in family business. So you need to be able to face that issue early on and have the right tools to provide preservation of the legacy and the family impact on the business going forward. So I come from it from an external point of view. I have seen numerous businesses across Australia which are family-owned businesses, and with the last decade or so, over a decade or so, developed a quite strict passion toward preserving the legacy of the businesses that we operated. And throughout today, it'll be interesting because David will talk more from an internal point of view, and then I'll talk, or my perspective will be more external in terms of that. How about we'll jump to the first area, David, and I'm going to ask you questions. So it'll be interesting to see both the internal and the external perspective of it. So you're a family member, you're also an advisor. What is legacy? Why is it even important?
Legacy. I define legacy as what you leave behind, and that means the things that people say about you after you're no longer around. And when people die, we reflect on their lives, and we reflect on what their impact on the world. And at the funeral of a founder, patriarch of a great family business, does he want them to say, wow, he was the founder of such and such a famous brand and sold it for $1 billion? Is that what they want written on his tombstone? Is that what he wants to leave behind? That's legacy. And we have a choice. We can leave behind what we want to leave behind. What we leave behind is our imprint on the world. We're here for a number of years, hopefully a lot, and afterwards we're gone. And when we're gone, we leave something behind, and what we leave behind is our legacy. And more often than not, when people think about legacy, and it can be a very difficult thing to think about, but when people think about it, they don't think about the material stuff. They think about relationships. They think about family. And that's what's really important. The material stuff, it's a scorecard. It comes and goes. But family is something that can really endure. And let's discuss that a bit further, Nitay.
Thank you, David. And I think the important part, and hopefully we can help founders and family businesses throughout this presentation, especially with a different point of view, both, and we'll talk what it means in a moment. What does it mean an external solution and an internal solution? But the key here is really to find the secret to creating a legacy, both in the family and in the business, because both of them are not necessarily the same, but we'll touch on it in a moment. Do you have anything to add on that, David?
Yes. So thinking about legacy, a lot of people don't like to think about it. And the reason they don't like to think about it is because legacy is about what happens when I'm dead. And nobody wants to think about what happens when they're dead. And of all the people who don't like to think about it, the people who least like to think about it are entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs have a something. They have a drive to create, to build, and if they're successful, they do that, and they are able to create businesses, enterprises, and the wealth that goes with that. And that is, it's an amazing thing to be able to create something from nothing, to have an idea and turn it into a business and then grow that business and scale it so the business has a life of its own. It's a very powerful thing. And And entrepreneurs and patriarchs in families have very, very healthy egos. And that's a necessary ingredient to being a good entrepreneur. You have to have self-belief. And when you have that self-belief and you have that ego and you have achieved a lot, then you think it can go on forever. And the last thing you want to think about is what happens when you die. The last thing you want to think about is the prospect of dying. And that's why legacy, while a very powerful topic, is a really, really uncomfortable one for people to discuss.
I think it's a fantastic point. Again, as an external person who comes to see family businesses, what I often see, and this is from the ground, not according to Richard, I've seen numerous businesses here, especially in Australia. And you touch on a very important point. Entrepreneurs are very special people. They're not normal. It's not normal to come from nothing and say, I think I'm going to put a little wall here and then I'll build my factory and now I'm going to produce whatever it is that you do, whether it's factory, real estate, or whatever it is. The point is this. They think, I'm an entrepreneur as well, you as well, David. We think we're 20 when we're no longer 20 in terms of energy and ability and to create something material. But the issue is when you come of age and you're talking about a trauma event, that's when you need to start thinking about your legacy and how you preserve it, because you're no longer 20 and this energy will not be there for forever. Which I think leads me to the next topic, and I'll share my screen quickly just to refresh the memory. So we're now talking at the second part of the presentation, which is identity and family business. And I think that's a good segue to that. And the main reason for it, for many entrepreneurs and family-owned businesses, the concept of their own identity and the family business identity is often merged, at least for me, from an external point of view, when I come and see this business. And that is an absolutely critical point. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this, David.
Yes, it's definitely something that you that I can empathize with, having gone on that journey. Because when you create a business, you have a passion, you have an energy, and you dive into it, and you think about it 24/7. You lie in bed at 2 a.m. With ideas or worrying about how you're going to make payroll in the early days, or what am I going to do? Should I do this? Should I do that? It consumes you. And I liken creating a business to having a child. And it's very interesting. There's research about this, about how, in families, the business competes with the children for attention. I like to compare it to the journey of having a child, because when you have a child, when the child is young, Nitay, you've got a young child, mine are a little bit older, but a young child requires a lot of attention, and a business in its infancy also requires a lot of attention. And as the child matures, as the business matures, it requires a different type of attention. As my businesses grew, I reached a point where I wanted to implement more structured management or governance, because that's what the business needed at the time. The business needs to have those things at the right time in its life cycle. And like children, the business matures. Our children grow up and they move out, they find partners, they build their own lives, and they leave us. And we need to go through that same journey in the business life cycle to say, this business has now grown up. Yes, I started it 20, 30 years ago, and I've seen it grown, but now it's its own thing. And so our personal identity is very tied up in what we think about and what we spend our time doing. And if we're immersed in a business and working at it and putting all of our energy in it, it's inseparable from us. It's an important part of our life. Somebody says to you, what do you do? Oh, I started such and such a business. Yes, but what's your identity? Who are you? And very often our identity gets too tied up in that business and we find it hard to separate. So our identity is an important ingredient in our business, but at the same time, it's important with the passage of time to separate at some point and to make sure that our identity stays intact beyond the business, and that the business can start to, as I said before, serve us as an asset and serve us rather than us be a slave to them.
I'm going to make two comments on this, David. And as you were speaking, this resonates with me personally. So obviously, I have done succession a number of times through businesses I bought here in Australia, with the challenges that come through it, see different journeys and different entrepreneurs. But as you're speaking, I was looking at my own. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm aware of the need for succession. I'm aware of the need of systems in day one. I have a young daughter as well, as you know, but it's still hard. It's still very, very hard. I struggle with it, and I'm aware of it in a younger age than the age of the usual entrepreneurs that you and I deal with, which is around 70, 65 years old, great business people. So what I'm trying to say here, this challenge doesn't escape people. It exists in all ages, even though you're aware of it, that challenge will occur. How you deal with the challenge, that's the important part going forward. That's the message I'm trying to send.
It's very interesting. You know, when you start a business and you might be at a certain stage in the business, a little bit younger, and somebody comes to you and says, "This is a fantastic business. I'm going to make you an offer," and you consider that offer, and that might be, okay, look, the business is earning this. This is the multiple. Wow, this is a fantastic offer. I should take this. Okay, that is a financial decision. But there's a whole other side to your relationship with the business, and that is the identity, the emotional relationship with the business. And the rational side of you might say, yes, this is a fantastic deal. I have to take it. And you may go ahead and take it. And you may have a fantastic financial outcome. And then the day after settlement, you get up in the morning and you say, oh my God, what have I done? My whole life was this business, and suddenly there's a huge black hole. There's an emptiness inside of me. I don't know what to do. What am I? I was this business for 20 years. I built it up, and now all I've got to show for it is a big fat bank account. What is my life about? And this is the journey that I've been through, and this is the journey that I believe business owners need to go through. Not just the financial journey, not just the business growth journey, but the emotional journey of being a business owner, and the emotional journey of learning to relate to your business and have the business identity and the personal identity. And if you go through that journey as in the lead up to whether it's a liquidity event, whether it's simply making the business sale ready, the emotional journey will prepare you for what will come, so that you don't have that awful feeling afterwards of emptiness, that something is missing in your life. And this is, you know, I'm very passionate about this because I've gone through it several times in the businesses that I've created. And the only reason I've been able to successfully exit those businesses is because I've exited them emotionally as well as financially.
It's a fantastic point. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are not aware of how embedded the identity are in the business. And it happens over 30, 40 years. And only when it's time to retire or exit, that's when the issue starts to emerge. I will make two comments on that. The first one, it is absolutely important, and you're spot on, in identifying who you are as a human being and what is the business separate to you. That's two different things, they're not one. That's number one. The second comment I have to make is, obviously, I worked with a number of founders in the past, and I call it, and it's not a psychological term, but I call it filling in the black hole. So what I often see, and that's something I've learned in time when I do a succession plan as an exit for a founder, to pay very careful attention to what's next for them, and how can they fill what I call the black hole that the business used to fill for him. Because that energy is not going to go away. The fact that 70, the entrepreneurs, the very special people with incredible energy, that energy needs to be directed to another positive element, whether that's travel, cars, racing, whatever it is, whatever the passion is, but you need to identify it and help them reach there. Because if they don't, what I've seen, unfortunately, it leads to a destructive behavior, whether that's depression, whether that's it's a spiral down. If that black hole, the emotional context that the business provided to the identity of the founder, is not the post-exit. Do you agree with that, David?
Absolutely. And you see situations. one of my favorite case studies at university was this entrepreneur who created an electric chuppa chup, and he sold it to Hasbro for a large amount of money and retired at quite a young age because he didn't need to work. But there's only so many times you can play golf, and he got tired of it, and then he did it all again and created the disposable electric toothbrush, and sold that again for a very large exit, and again retired, and before too long got sick of golf, and did it again and created an electric cleaning product for sinks and toilets. The passion does not wane. Energy wanes, but the passion to create in entrepreneurs does not disappear the day after you've got out of the business.
David, I bought a business. I can't say the name, obviously, or the timing, but I bought a business a while back, and the person was nearly 70. Yeah, and I said, "Oh wow, congratulations on being such a successful business." He said, "That's actually my second business. 5 years ago, I sold my first one." I said, "Hold on, so you sold it around the age of 65? You sold your first business?" He said, "Yeah, it's a very successful business, very good business." And I said, sorry, at the age of 60, he sold it, the first one. And I said, "So why didn't you retire?" He said, "Oh, I tried to retire. I had non-compete for 5 years. I tried to retire, believe me, but retirement nearly killed me. So when 5 years later, I started my second business, which I'm now selling to you." So this is a real story. This is real life story.
Oh yeah, look, it's so true. And retirement can kill.
That's right.
My late father, he was working a month before he died, and he died when he was 93.
Wow.
Okay, that's a bit excessive for most people. He wasn't your average person, but there are so many stories of people who retire, and whether it's from employment or from business, and suddenly they lose their passion for life, and they quickly spiral downwards, and they're gone before long, and it's too soon.
Correct. And I think the realization that most founders have is, and I know it sounds like a cliche. I do know, like, it's what I'm about to say sounds like the cliche, that money is not everything. And they need to, because now they have the money, they did the exit. Now what? That's the question. Now what? And that's where the importance of filling that black hole and the energy that they have into something positive as opposed to negative. Now, unless you have any other comments on it, I suggest perhaps we move to the next area, because I think it ties up to when does it actually work in the real world. Do you have any other comments before we move on to that topic?
Let's move on.
Okay, I'll share the screen so you can see. The next area we're going to explore today is when does it actually work in the real world? And that's the third area today that we are going to discuss. Naturally, we can't cover most of it. Sorry, all the secret for successful succession in an hour and a half for today. Reach out to me and David later on. But I think, and we'll talk about it later as well, the first thing for me is to decide whether you want to take an internal succession or external succession. We'll come to it later on. I'm going to talk to you obviously about the external succession. So one of the examples of a successful succession externally, which means I came along and I bought the business from a founder, was when the mindset of the founder was correct. I in the right place and ready to leave the business, but not give up on his legacy. The first one was a manufacturer. Again, I'm afraid I can't give too many details. He was, funnily enough, of a younger age, in mid-50s, but he was he was tired. That founder was tired, and he recognized that he was tired. And when we came across, it was a journey of explaining to him what the steps he needs to do. And the main issue in that, when you do an external succession, is you can't take a founder and just rip him off from the business and expect that both the founder will be okay and the business will be okay. There's a journey there that needs to take. So in the succession plan that we have done, which took 3 years, by the way, the steps that we've taken is to slowly remove the founder, and it's all with consultation with the founder, slowly remove the founder from the business and the day-to-day operation. And the way we did it, we said, what do you like doing most in the business? Not surprised, it was innovation. He loved the innovation, and he loved speaking with customers, which from my experience is what I see often and often. Again, and we said, okay, what do you like less to do? He said, I don't like dealing with the day-to-day admin of the employees sick, they need a day leave, a day off, or whatever it was. So in the succession plan, we took I call it the burdening elements that he has on the day-to-day operation of the business fairly quickly from him, focused him on the innovation and talking to the customer, which he loved doing. And over the 3 years, we even took this out. Again, it's all with consultation with him. We took those responsibility from him. And after 3 years, he was able to fully retire from the business. Again, it's a journey. You can't rip off someone. It's not a bandage solution. It takes time, and it's a journey to do that, because that journey provided him both the emotional context and the ability to let go. And I'll use that phrase again because it's very important, the ability to let go of the business on his terms and on his emotional journey. And of course, I can't give the example because then people will know who it is, but we found also where the black hole was and made sure that in his personal life, that black hole was filled in. And that was a very successful succession. And that's the typical route that we take with founders. There's others that take similar journeys. David?
Yeah, look, it's a fantastic example because it really illustrates that succession is not an event, it's a process.
Correct.
And, you say 3 years, yep, that's roughly what it takes. Now, if you're a business owner and you say, I want a succession plan, then that means you've got to start it 3 years before you want it to happen. And that's the challenge. Everybody says when to start. It reminds me of a wonderful Chinese proverb. When is the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is 20 years ago. And the next question is, when is the next best time to plant a tree? And the answer is today. Because I can't plant the tree 20 years ago. I can't set in chain the 3 to 5 year plan for succession now that ends now. What I can do is start it now, and then in 3 to 5 years, it will roll out slowly, step by step. And that's a very important thing to remember. We talk about in real world examples, success and failure. And my view in general on that is that we can learn more from failure than from success, because success is very hard to replicate. You can't do exactly the same thing that somebody else did to be successful, because you can never replicate the context in which they did those things. On the other hand, if you study failure, you can say, oh, okay, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And if we know the things not to do, then more likely we'll be on a path to do the things that we do, or that we should do rather. So, I've seen, a fair number of failures in succession. Obviously, holding on too long is the classic case where the owner is unable to let go. And the reason they're unable to let go is because they're so entrenched and they haven't gone on that emotional journey. And, we said succession is a process. Founder grows old, founder dies in a very short amount of time and leaves the business in a mess because there's so much corporate memory and lack of governance that's trapped in the founder's mind and has not been handed over to other people so that it can form the value of the business. I look at businesses and I say to business owners, what is the business worth? And they say to me, well, our EBIT such and such, we're worth X. And I say, okay, and what is this business worth without you? And they say, gee, what's it worth without me? And you can calculate, if you were immediately extracted from that business, what would it be worth? It's worth a lot less, because you may be an important brand of that business, an important figurehead. And the goal for business owners that I work with is to say, well, let's try to get those things to converge. Let's make sure that the value of the business with you and the value of the business without you is the same and is maximized. This is, a classic case of failure. The other case is that I, and I see these archetypes, I see them so often, and that's the way I think rather than thinking of specific cases. But I see the same patterns that emerge over and over. And this is, where the founder says, things will continue forever. My child will run the business. I've been working with them for 20 years. I can retire. The son will continue exactly the way I did it. And very often those children who are in those businesses are there for all the wrong reasons. They're there because out of a sense of obligation rather than being having the opportunity to choose to join that business, to choose to be part of the business journey, and to create their own journey. In the words of Jay Hughes, who's one of the doyens of this industry, he says everybody ought to be creator of their own dreams rather than custodian of somebody else's dream. Everybody in business needs to be there for the right reason. And in a family business, where you're the child that's been brought into the business as the heir apparent, and I see so much of this in Asian families in particular, where the eldest son is obliged to join the family business and does not have a choice. And I really feel for them. Everyone who says to me, my son's going to take over the business, I said, have you ever discussed what your son wants or your daughter? Most of the time it's a son, but very often.
Almost expected of them.
Yeah, it's expected. And as I said before, the founder has this entrepreneur mindset, which is a fantastic thing. But what comes with it is a huge ego that says, I can continue forever. It will continue exactly the way I want it to be. And the term we use is ruling from the grave, where the successor sets up a succession that is prescriptive, that is what they want to continue even after they're gone. Legacy is about, to some extent, immortality, but it's not immortality in that you set down how things will be forever, but rather you create something that embodies your values in perpetuity, because that's something that can continue forever. Values can continue and evolve in a founder, but where the founder either goes too early or too late, that is where it's destined for failure. Where the founder thinks that they can truly continue to run things in terms of the legal structures and trust that they set up, continue to run things forever, even after they're no longer alive.
I think that's a great comment here. Particularly want to emphasize the need to put the foundations of what your legacy should look like early on and not too late. Because if you God forbid, drop dead tomorrow, you can't now start thinking about how to put the foundations of your legacy in the future. You need to put the foundations early on. The second comment I'd like to make is around value, right? And I'm keen to hear your comments on this once I finish this. What I often see, not often, but sometimes see, is when the identity is too much embedded into the business, there's no real appreciation of the value of the business without the founder and with the founder, right? And you touched on it briefly, David, before. For example, in our world, there's pre well-known multiples that when we go and discuss of certain size businesses, that the market pay for those businesses. But once in a while, I will see a founder that, the numbers are incorrect, but I'll make them up, say the business is worth $5 million, and you go to the founder, and I'm just using these numbers as an example, and the founder will say, I want 20. And they're serious, right? And you say, why? And they say, well, 5 goes to my elder son, 5 I need to give to my daughter, 5, this is a true story that happened to me in Melbourne. I won't say too much more than that. And he says, yeah, and 5 for my niece, and I need about whatever, the numbers don't add up now, but I need at least 5 million to take care of me and my wife for the rest. That's how they think, right? I'm not saying it's incorrect, but there's a mismatch between how much the value of the business is in the market to what they think it's worth. And it's primarily also because of the 40 years that they put in. They're selling their life work to someone else. So that's where there's a mismatch, not all the time, but I did see it from time to time. And often it's very hard to convince them otherwise. And unfortunately, what it leads to is the decline of the business as the owner progresses in age. David, have you come across this before?
Yes. Well, this is the difference between the internal and the external view. And this is the importance of the external view. I've got a business, I've created this business, I'll throw an outrageous multiple because in my mind, it's worth more. I assign a greater value to it. On the other hand, an accountant, a buyer says, well, I don't have the emotional value, I have the mathematical value. And the mathematical value is based on traditional valuation methods that are used for businesses, and that external view clashes with the internal view. The internal view says, "I put my whole life into this. What's it worth? You want to throw a number on it? That number is an insult because they'll conjure up a target number in their mind years before. Well, one day I'm going to sell this business for $20 million, and I'm going to give this to this child and this to this child, and buy the boat and go on the trip and all the other dreams. And that's why every business needs that external view, whether it comes from external advisors or independent members on the board. They give the business that they temper that internal perspective and give it the external real world perspective that they need.
I think it's a fantastic point, and perhaps a transition to our next area, the natural area that we're going to talk to about, which is awareness, right? And I'll share my screen quickly. And the next area of discussion is really the importance of being aware. What does it mean to be aware of succession, and what options do you have as part of it? So now when picking the importance of being aware. Now, the first thing to do is to actually be aware that succession event will happen in your lifetime. Whether you're 40 or 70, you have more time or less time to think about it. But the first thing is that you need to be aware. David?
Yes, this is what I call in the words of Don Rumsfeld, the things we don't know, we don't know. When you're absorbed in a business, you're very single-minded, you're focused on that and that alone. And there are other things that you need that you don't know. And succession is one of them. It can jump up on you out of nowhere, seemingly as a result of all sorts of external factors or other things that are going on in your life. So bringing that awareness in to say, this is something that I need to start thinking about. I can't be only thinking about the business or only thinking about the future. I have to start thinking about that at some point, there will be some type of exit. And we're going to get into that detail shortly. And the other thing about it is that you need to be aware that these are going to be uncomfortable discussions. These are going to be confronting discussions. And it's very important to prepare yourself for that, because when somebody says we need to talk about this, it's very easy to push back and say, I don't want to. And inside you're saying, what do you mean? I'm not going to die. I'm going to be able to do this forever. I'm Superman. Look what I've done so far. So preparing yourself for having discussions that are going to make you uncomfortable is an important part of the preparation and the awareness around succession.
Thank you, David. And I think you touched on a good point there. Usually founders that I come across, they don't, as an external person, to see someone who's been thinking about it since they were 50 or 40. And that is very important, by the way. You need to think about it from that age. But they get to an age where, and we mentioned that in passing before, they have a health scare, and then they become aware that something needs to change. Or from my experience, and I've blessed most founders or family-owned businesses that it's what the example I'm going to give now, the first grandchild come along. And usually there's a gap of a year or two before they realize, there's more to life than just running the same business for 40 years. So I bless everyone that it's the first grandchild, bring that awareness through. But unfortunately, in most cases, it's a health scare that comes and bring that into surface. And if I'm not mistaken, you had a similar impact as well, David.
Yes, that was something that happened around 40. And it got me thinking. And, I just touching on what you said, it's very important to be proactive in everything we do. And in business, we try to be proactive. We try to stay ahead of the curve, aware of the risks to the business. And succession, mortality, they are some of the other risks, the things that go on in our lives. They are also risks to the business. And therefore, just as it's important to be proactive about business risks, business operational risks, it's important to be proactive about the risks associated with what might go on in our lives, in our lifestyles, to our health, and all of those other things that can potentially impact not only our lives, but also our businesses.
And it's a tough topic. Because you are really thinking about death. You're on death.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to talk about it. But guess what? Nobody has yet found a way out of it. So it's quite a paradox. The one thing that we're least comfortable talking about is the one thing that is certain.
And it's the only thing that, if you do it right, will continue your legacy after you're no longer in this world. There's another element of awareness. So we rightly discussed you need to be aware and you need to think about it. I use your tree analogy now. You plant the tree now, don't wait for the forest to grow and you go, oh, I should have planted the tree back then. The second part is you need to be aware of what options you have in terms of succession. And it goes back to the points we discussed before in terms of identity, the business, and legacy. You have different options when it comes to succession. And if I put them in two different buckets, one of them is the internal succession, i.e. a family member takes it or you find someone internal to take the business, or the external option. Now, naturally, David, you are your expertise in the internal succession, and naturally I provide an external succession to the family business and the legacy. I'd love to hear your comments on this, David.
Whether or not your succession is internal or external, the foundation is that the business should be sale ready. And that's, you know, I said to somebody, you know, you make your business sale ready. He says, I have no intention to sell. My son's going to take over. My daughter's going to take over. They're going for management buyout. It's a worthwhile exercise to make a business sale ready because it makes the business more robust and prepared for options. Because at the end of the day, what we all want is options. We want choices. Having a business, owning a business, having wealth gives us life choices that not everybody has. And making sure that the business you own is sale ready, and we can talk about what that means in practice, that gives you options. You may never sell it, but being able to sell it itself is of value.
I want to unpick this a little bit more because you used the right word, sell ready. Now, a lot of people think is you prepare the business, you gear it up, and it's ready to be sold every day, tomorrow, and whenever someone knocks on the door, it's ready to sell. To me, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts here, sell ready means you start to put the systems and foundations in the business to the event that you are no longer part of that business. So I use the word sustainability. Your business is sustainable. And as you know, in my case, middle market type businesses, the highest risk for someone external coming to a business is the key man risk. Is because usually the founder makes all the decision. And a good business, as you describe it, and rightly so, a ready to sell business have some sort of mechanism internally as well, beyond the financials, to sustain the business in the event that the founder is not there. David?
That's exactly my thinking. And, you know, for me, I was driven by Michael Gerber's well-known book, The E-Myth. Because when we create a business, we're creating a vehicle of wealth creation, and that vehicle makes profit, and the profit produces dividends that can go to the owners. But then what's left? What we really want to create is an asset, okay? And what is the value? Is the value, as you say, the key people? No, the key people are not the value. The key people have the ability to create that value, but the value is in the business systems, the business operations, because they are the thing that make sure that anybody can buy that business and run it. It doesn't have to be a McDonald's franchise where you go to McDonald's University and run it, but all businesses have systems, processes, intellectual property, and when somebody buys that business, that is what they're buying. So the process of making a business sale ready is really a process of formalizing that operational structure, instituting governance, so that anybody, not anybody, but somebody appropriate can take over that business, can replace key roles over a period of time and realize value from that asset.
I agree with you, David. And it doesn't matter, by the way, whether it's internal or external. Your comment is correct. The foundations needs to be there. And I'm using the word foundations here, but there's different definitions for it. Which leads me to the next thing. So, all right, so far in our discussion, if you're listening today, you probably have a clear understanding that you need to think about it early, and you also need to think about the two options that you have, whether it's internal succession or external succession. But, and I'm going to share my screen here, I think it naturally leads me to the next topic, which is, what are the challenges? The fact that you're aware that you need to have succession, the fact that you understand or choose to go internal succession or external succession, what challenges are you going or likely to face. And before I ask you for your comment, David, there's a very important statistics, and today is not about those statistics, but as I'm sure you already know, 70% of family businesses fail to succeed to the second generation. 90% fail to succeed to the third generation, and 97% fail to succeed to the fourth generation. So the reality is, and it's a sad reality, and I don't want to talk about the statistic too much, happy for you to contact me or David and we can give you those statistics, is that there's a very high likelihood that as a founder of a family business, if you don't take the steps early, or if you don't think about it, in your own lifetime, the business is likely to cease to exist. David?
Yeah, so those statistics are well known, and that ties into the famous proverb, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation makes it, the second generation spends it, the third generation loses it, etc., etc. These are well-known things about family businesses. But I think what we need to do is we need to challenge some of that thinking. Yes, those are statistics that people have established using various studies. The question is, do I want a business? Does a business need to last 3 generations? 3 generations means 100 years.
Correct.
Some businesses shouldn't necessarily live that long, because another statistic, you look at the top 100 shares in most stock markets, and they rotate. How many businesses have been in the top 100 for 20 or 30 or 50 years? Very few. The business environment evolves, and people have to evolve. Businesses have to evolve to change and meet new needs and come to the challenge of disruption. So not every business can last. When I had my billing business, I still have it. My son, when he was a lot younger, I said to him, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And he said, "Oh, I want to join Daddy's business." And I said, and he was a young kid, I said, "Why do you want to do that?" And I thought, my business, okay, it's something I've created. It's a vehicle for making money, creating wealth, but it doesn't have to outlive me. It has a purpose, and that purpose, at some point, that it meets that purpose, and then we move on, or the business evolves. I had no idea at the time that the business would be doing the same thing 20, 30 years later. And I don't know what's going to be in another 20, 30 years. Certainly, our business has seen disruption and change, and we've had to evolve and pivot and move into new vertical markets to meet that need. All businesses have to do that.
David, if I pick you on that point, and if you're not comfortable, please don't share too much details. This is interesting because you're obviously educated in that area, and your words to your son is what I would say to my son. It doesn't have to be that way. But let's look at your personal story from the generation before. Was that expectation to do that?
I think in our family, I had the benefit of being the youngest, and therefore there was already family members in the family business, and therefore there was less of an obligation on me to join, and I'm very grateful for that. But in our family, we had a textile manufacturing business, and that ceased to be viable. As happens in many manufacturing businesses, and some of these manufacturing businesses shifted to becoming importers and shifted the manufacturing offshore, and that was their way to survive. In our case, we were manufacturing locally, and we ended up shutting it down. And instead, again, as many families did, we were in manufacturing in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and in the 70s moved into commercial property, or any kind of real estate really. And then that continued to be a wealth creation vehicle when the manufacturing business ceased to be viable. So, is there a single business that lasts 100 years? No. And who knows what's going to be the future of commercial property after COVID? It's, it seems to be worth less than it is, and workplace is going to change. No business lasts forever.
So to overcome the challenges that naturally come and with the unflattable statistics, and I agree with you, we need to challenge those statistics. I'm a founder now. What steps do I need to take to try and avoid the challenges that usually comes into it? And the first one obviously is the definition. What does success mean to me? What else?
Yeah.
From your experience?
So defining success is very important, because if somebody has conjured in their mind that they dream that this business can last forever, that may be success for them, but the family needs to have a discussion of what success means to the key stakeholders in the family. So it's very important to have these cross-generational discussions about success, about legacy, about the family values and the family mission and the family purpose. And having those discussions can help the family together as a group define what their mission is, what their purpose is as a family. And that in turn can drive decisions about various family operating assets. Those discussions can be awkward. There are people who may not want to have those discussions, and they will give rise to questions of mortality of some of the older members of the family. But those are discussions that are essential for the family to define what success means for them. And it means something different for every family.
And the obstacles they're likely to face when having those discussions?
The obstacles are, in respect of those discussions, the obstacles are that they're uncomfortable, that family members may be conflicted, because, you know, in any family business, family members wear multiple hats. You know, they may be owners, they may be employees, they may be managers. Okay, those three hats that family members wear and various combinations of them mean that family members have different interests. So any discussion about the future that involves change can be a challenge to the status quo. And that again means different things to different families depending on what their roles are. So, you know, there might be a family member who's in a very comfortable position and doesn't want it to change. There can be family businesses that are weighed down by the way they do things and are therefore unable to do the strategic renewal that they do need to do from time to time to make sure that the value is retained. And there are so many case studies of family businesses that have failed to do this. And it's something that it can be very hard for family businesses to do because they are weighed down by history and weighed down by people who are there for a very long time. In family businesses, people stay for much longer and therefore they have the risk of getting stale. And that's where implementing governance, which means having boards, having independence, that allows the family business to do the things that businesses need to do, look at strategy and look at the long-term perspective, look at defining success and all of those things that can help the business make the changes it needs to do, whether that means succession, whether that means pivoting, whether that means selling, in the best interest of the business and the business continuity and the various stakeholders.
Now, David, I know in previous discussions that we had offline throughout the previous months or so, you kept saying, you know, you need to ask why you're doing this, until you really get to the core of it, and then you can from then move to the plan, right? Do you mind elaborating a little bit on that? Because I think that is a very important point. It's not enough to have a plan, you need to know why, but it's really drilling down to the detail, to the core.
Yeah. You know, and when my son said to me, I want to join Daddy's business, I shouldn't have said no. I should have said why. Why do you want to do that? Because, you know, this is a common methodology that came out of Japanese manufacturing, I think, asking why 6 times. And that's the way you get the real answer, you know, when looking at process failure. Something broke. Why did it break? Well, it broke because something else broke. And why did that break? Et cetera, et cetera. And eventually you trace back to the core, the root cause. So if somebody says, you know, I want this business to continue forever. Why? Why? Because I'm worried about dying. But if the business lives forever, well, I can consider myself to be immortal. Okay. These are crazy questions because sometimes we say, oh, but it's obvious. No, but only by asking why and challenging ourselves do we delve into the reasons that are behind the reasons. So that's a methodology that can help us get to the core drivers that are behind what we want.
Which, by the way, I think is the most important thing to do first, because once you have the core, you can then expand in terms of the different solutions, different avenues or structures even that you can take to exercise the succession.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, David, which leads me, I think we need to, with your permission, we're talking about the challenges. I'm sure in people's head, there's a few myths that I'd like to mythbuster with you, if that's even a phrase, but let's mythbust some of those challenges or issues that they think exist, right? And I think the first one, and I'd love to hear comments on this, is the concept between family business, family wealth, family legacy. They all seem to be intertwined. Is that necessarily so?
Yes, and it's a fantastic point, and I love busting myths. So, you quoted that statistic of 70% of business transitions
That's
fail.
right.
And everybody says, oh no, my family business isn't going to last forever. And we already smashed that as well. It doesn't have to last forever. But something that can last forever is family wealth. So there's family business and there's family wealth. And it's important to separate them. Business is a vehicle for creating family wealth. Family wealth, it is far easier for that to endure through generations by diversification, good governance, and all of the things that you do in any wealth management situation. Family businesses go through an evolution, and in a family business, you start the business, and the business becomes, as we've said, all-consuming. All of your energy is devoted to growing that business. And if you compare the family business to your family's net wealth, in many cases, the family business is 90-something% of the family wealth. And that's why people think that they are synonymous. But that doesn't always remain the case. It only is for a period of time. Because as the business grows, the business pays dividends, hopefully, and they might take money out of the business and they might use that to put into other assets. They may be operating assets, they may be passive assets. And over time, the family business may grow, but the family business as a share of the family wealth may reduce. And this is the process of diversification. It may come to a point where the family owns multiple operating businesses and non-operating assets, and they are what constitutes the portfolio of the entire family wealth. And that evolves to something that we call not a family business, not a family business, but the business family. And the business family is a family that has wealth, and that wealth is in operating assets and non-operating assets, and that wealth is well governed. And by taking that evolution from having all of your wealth concentrated in a single operating asset in the family business to being spread across multiple assets, operating and non-operating, that is a way to protect the family wealth, to insulate it, and to make sure that it can endure for far more than 3 generations.
Thank you, David. And I think you touch something that rings bells to me is often I see founders of family businesses getting sold, and I see this relates to I like the phrase family business. Sorry, business of family. What phrase did you use there?
The business family.
The business family.
Yeah.
And also in terms of their own legacy and wealth, sometimes it is very difficult to someone who 90% of his wealth came from one business. Now they exited the business to do this transition. And this is the black hole I was speaking about, to do the transition between a business owner to an investor. And that's something that they need to think very carefully as part of the succession, how they're going to deal with the next stage of liquidity or wealth. Do you have any comments on that?
Oh, absolutely. So there's there's a syndrome that happens when somebody takes a liquidity event and they end up drowning in liquidity. They suddenly go from having all of their wealth tied up in a single operating asset that's achieving very good returns, sometimes 20, 30%. And then they've got a hunk of cash and they go to the market and say, well, what can I do with this? Oh, I can order, I can get high single digits or maybe low double digits.
Lucky.
Where do I start? And that becomes a whole other discussion. But that discussion has to happen not after they've settled, but that has to happen, as we discussed, as preparation towards an external succession, to make sure that they are going to meet their needs in the future, where previously the business has been able, that the family has been sustained by the dividends of the business, that dividend income will drop and they'll have to move to a mix of a mix of assets that is going to deliver what the family needs in the future.
Thank you. Let's think about another myth buster here, and this is a bit of a left field. And I know you sold a number of businesses, David. How do you work in a business for 40 years? It's obviously part of your identity. You went through the steps. You understand that some of your legacy, whether you want it or not, is tied up to the business. How do you find the right buyer? Is it just price?
This is very interesting. I remember a story of this family business. There were already 3 generations were in the business, but the founding generation had already moved on, at least in the business. And they received an offer, and the offer was very generous. And they took it to the family council because they were a very well-governed business, and they said no. And the reason they said no is because the business was more than just an operating asset. It had a community aspect to it. So it was a franchise system. Yeah. And the franchisees, they felt part of the business name and the brand, and they really wanted that brand to endure. And they did not feel that a buyer would be able to continue running the business in the way they wanted it to run. And for them, that means that they wanted to hold on to the business. Will they sell it sometime in the future? Is there some magic number that they would say, yes, I would take? At that time, no. At that time, they decided this is a business that we want to keep running and stay in the family for perhaps generations. That doesn't mean that that has to be set in concrete. It may be that younger family members will say it's time to get out, or it may be that family members will find a way for somebody to buy that business and still find an appropriate buyer that will stay true to the spirit of the business. And this, brings us back to our discussion about legacy. For this family, the business was their legacy. The business was far more than something that created wealth. It was something that created a community. And they were the hub of that community. And their franchisees were part of that community. And the customers of the franchisees were part of that community. And that was something that held value for them far more than the financial value.
And the reality is the founder of a 40-year-old successful business I know the liquidity even provides a significant amount of dollar value, but they're already wealthy. They're already comfortable most times. They're already comfortable and already doing well from a wealth perspective. I think a lot of them, obviously the number is always important from what I see in the market, but they also want to ensure that the business is going to survive going forward and that it's just not going to get ripped apart and destroyed into 1,000 pieces and thrown into the ocean while the little drivers of it is being embedded into something else.
Yes, and we could lead into a discussion about different private equity approaches, okay? Because some private equity companies will, as you say, rip a company to bits and break it up and sell off the pieces on the assumption that they are worth more than the whole. And other private equity companies are buy and hold. They like businesses and they want to keep holding them and extract maximum value for them and help them grow. And those are very different approaches. And each owner has got to find what works for them. And it could be that some owners are more inclined to go with a buy and hold private equity option because that gives them the comfort that the business will continue at least for a period of time and not be torn asunder in front of them.
And that is a personal choice. I think that leads us to, unless you have any other comment, David, that leads us to the key takeaways. And I want to know, in particular, have a brief chat about the execution and transition. Say, how do you set the expectation? What are the next steps that you are going to take? I'm going to share my screen briefly. So where we are today or right now is in this part, which is the key takeaways. It is the last part of the discussion before I'll ask David whether he has any concluding comments. So David, we understood you're a founder, you understood all the steps. How do I start? Do you take a deep breath first?
You wake up one morning, you're a business owner, you wake up one morning, and hopefully you haven't been to the hospital.
Hopefully it's the grandchild.
at some point, or had a grandchild. That's a much better way. Yeah, you've been to the hospital, but it's to see your new grandchild.
For the grandchild.
And you think, oh my goodness me, I don't want to be doing this again in 10 years. Where do you start? And it starts probably with having discussions with key stakeholders. What do we want? What do we want and why? That's where it starts. Because you've got to make sure that you're doing this for the right reasons, not because it's expected of you or because you don't have a successor for the business or because your children don't want to be involved or because you're feeling flat and stale and burnt out. There are so many reasons to do it, and there are good reasons and there are not good reasons. So the first thing is to ask yourself why 6 times. Get to the bottom of it. And that's a discussion that has to be not just with the business owner or majority shareholder, but really with the stakeholders. And that may be family members, spouses, children, business partners. I want to do this. I need to have a good think about why. What is driving me? And try to imagine, what do I want my life to look like in 5 or 10 years? Those sorts of big picture discussions. Sometimes it can be helpful to have those discussions facilitated or use an advisor with an advisor. Having those discussions is where it starts, because that's where you set your vision to say, okay, I now want to embark on the next phase of my life. What does that look like? What do I want that to be? Let's design a new future. Okay, 20 years ago, I started this business and I dreamt of a future. Now I'm at that future. What does my next future look like?
I think there's an important aspect to point here. I agree 100% with what you said. Sometimes the founders don't have the tools, because we're all expert at different things. They don't have the tools to deal with them. Now, for me, as an external provider of a succession for the business particularly, I come to the party after the event happened and they decided that external succession is for them. And I'm happy to provide that solution. And we genuinely care about the business and preserving the legacy of the founders. But I think it's very also important to get the right advisor like yourself, David, early on, to have this discussion of saying the why, why, and really drill down to the systems and what is right for them. Is it internal? Is it external? And my view is, if in my own business, it's important to have the discussion early with an independent, trustworthy advisor like yourself, David, who can lead them through the journey of discovering what they even need, because they not always have the tool to do that. And I'm keen to hear your experience here.
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke before about the internal versus the external view, and bringing that external view. The owners may have particular dreams, and those dreams may not be possible. They may not be reasonable. And having somebody external who's seen many businesses like this before, who's helped families on that journey, to help you on that journey, to help you ask the right questions, to make sure you're doing it, to test your assumptions, to validate your thinking. That is a very helpful guide to work out what you want to do next. And this is something, obviously, that I do, helping businesses on the journey, because it is a journey. You don't wake up one morning and say, I'm putting the business on for sale. If you do that, then you may get a good financial outcome, but you may not get a good emotional outcome. And what I do is I help families. And when I say families, that doesn't mean not just the founder. Families means all the stakeholders in the family get a good family outcome, and that a good emotional outcome, so that after the transaction is completed and it's settled, the family have a clear idea of what's next, and they're not picking over the bones and fighting. All of that requires foundational work to help the family articulate its mission and have a clear path to what their future looks like.
I think that's very important, David, and it's important that you do the work before. And I'm telling you from my experience, I once went to see a Brisbane-based business a long time ago. Again, I can't mention the names. And some woman came to me at the gate. We were supposed to meet, let's call him John. That's not his name. Supposed to meet John, and the woman came through the door. He said, "Who are you?" And we said, "Hi, my name is Nitay. It doesn't matter where I'm from now, and I'm here to see John." Why? Like, who are you? I'm his daughter. She had no idea we were coming. Yeah. So obviously that discussion never happened. And I said, oh, pleasure to meet you. Where is, call him John again. John that's not his name. And she said, oh, I'm the head of HR. And I said, oh, okay. Thank you. Where's John? What we didn't realize that the titles in the family business don't necessarily mean anything. She was the CEO of the business, running the business on a daily basis. The title was head of HR because that's what they probably needed. But she was the effective CEO of the business, and she had no idea that the father is speaking to an external person to buy the business from him. The reason I tell this story, beyond the humor part of it, and it's a real story, me as a buyer will not proceed with the sale of a business when the family and the founder and everyone involved, and usually there's always family individual working in the business, are on the same page that this business is going to get departed from the family over the long term, and that now we are the guardians of the legacy of the family, and we will do everything in our power to preserve that legacy. David.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So important. It reminds me of another story of these two brothers who were in business, and they had reached an agreement in principle that they wanted to sell the business. And one of the brothers was traveling and met somebody and received an offer for the business, which was an outstanding offer, and he took the offer. And he called up his brother and he said, congratulations, we've sold the business for X. Brother said, fantastic, that's great. And, you know, they go through the process, the due diligence, prepare to sign the documents, and the other brother doesn't want to sign. And he's stunned. He says, you know, I told you we're selling the business. This is an amazing outcome. You know, they're paying 8 times multiple. And he says, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And, you know, they brought in an external to look at the situation, and you know, had separate discussions with the two brothers, and discovered that the other brother was aggrieved because while it was a good financial outcome, his brother didn't call him up and say, I've received an offer. I think it's fantastic. What do you think?
I see.
He just accepted the offer. He knew that his brother would be happy with it, but he didn't give his brother the respect as a co-owner to say, you know, yes, thank you for the offer. I need to check with the other co-owner. And if he agrees, we accept. So the brother went to the other brother and he said, no, I've got to apologize. Yes, it was a fantastic offer, but you know, we're 50-50 here. I should have said to you, do you want to sell at this price? So I'm asking you now, do you want to sell? And the brother said, yes. And they went ahead with it.
That's fantastic. That's really
it's a lovely story because, you know, whether they're co-owners, whether you can think of your children as future owners, everybody is a stakeholder, and understanding their views as stakeholders is so important to making sure that all of the non-financial aspects of the transaction go smoothly.
Yeah, I agree, David. Okay, so I'll share my screen again and I'll summarize and then come back to us just to see what we have discussed today. Just the key points. I'm not going to obviously elaborate on each one of them. So the way we approach today, and I hope this was beneficial to you, we first looked at what is legacy, and it's all in the context of family businesses, family wealth, legacy. What do I do next? I want to retire from the family business. We then separated between the founder identity, your identity, and family businesses, and I hope that was helpful for you to understand what it means. We also looked at some real life example when it actually works, succession in the real world or doesn't. Then we looked at the importance of awareness. You need to be aware. And I love David's analogy of planting the tree 20 years ago. And if you haven't, do it today. And the awareness is really in 2 parts. One, to be aware that you and I and all of us are one day won't be here on this planet, and what foundations we put for our succession, especially in a family business environment. And the second part of awareness is to be aware that there's internal succession possibilities and external succession possibilities. And with a trusted advisor, and we talked with David about it, you need to make the call what it is. Then we talked about the challenges that we've seen in the market and in real life, and some of the key takeaways. David, do you have any other comments before we conclude the session?
I think we really need to take it back to the beginning, and what it's about legacy. It's about having created something, wanting that to endure in some form. And wealth can endure, businesses can come and go. What can really endure is family and family values and family mission. And I think, you know, if you start there, then that's the correct order to look at things. What you really want to endure, what you want your legacy to be, what you want your grandchildren to say about you is, wow, he was a fantastic guy, and he, you know, loved his children, and he did so much for his community. Yes, that was enabled by, along the way, starting some businesses and creating some family wealth, and, you know, having some fantastic times together as a family. But at the end of the day, what you create through family business is legacy, and that can last forever.
Thank you, David. David, on a personal note, thank you very much for your time joining us today and educating both external and our own community about your experience. I particularly thank you for telling your personal story, both as a second generation in a family, but also how you deal with your second generation, which is your son and the businesses that you own. I think that's quite remarkable to see the shift, and you not only went through the journey, but you're also implementing in your own life the lessons that you have learned. And thank you again for your experience working with numerous amount of businesses and families and helping them transition. To those of you who watch at home, this is David's book. I hope you can see it. I highly, highly recommend it. If you want a copy or can't get access to it, reach out to me and David, and we will be sure to give you a copy of it. I'll share my screen again for you guys to see our contact details. If you have any questions, please reach out to any of us, or if you know David and need to contact me, feel free to contact David, or the other way around. If you want an introduction to David, please reach out. David.
Thanks very much, Nitay. I really enjoyed talking to you. I enjoy all of our discussions, but I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about these things today. And you know, to you, our viewers, I hope you've benefited from some of what you've heard, and you can put it into action to improve your lives and those of your families.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.